In the last lecture, we discussed at length about the basics of remote sensing. Today, it's time to connect the dots and build upon that foundation. On the menu today, we have the basics of geospatial analysis. Now, again, before defining it formally, what is geospatial analysis? Again, if we divide the two terms, geo and space. So, geo refers to Earth. Space is the extent or the area in which humans and non-living things they interact with each other. Again, if you have gone through the theory, space can also be of different types. It can be absolute space, which is measured in terms of distance, kilometers, coordinates, latitudes, longitudes. It can be relative space. It can be relational space. We'll not discuss much into that. So in the last, what is the need for this geospatial analysis then? In the last lecture, we collected a lot of data using satellites, drones, aircrafts, cameras, sensors. We collected the raster files and whatnot. Now, that data, when we have collected, that by in itself is not worth anything unless and until someone, some person or some software or some individual or some algorithm processes that to produce meaningful data. So here is where geospatial analysis comes in. So in simple words, if I want to define it in single line, it can be defined as the collection, the science that is important. Like we discussed in remote sensing, the science of collecting data from a distance about the Earth's surface and its features. So science of collection, storing, manipulating, querying, updating, visualizing. So all these keywords you can put. Sharing and collaborating over the cloud. Okay, you might have heard of concepts like SDI, spatial data infrastructure. So my challenge actually for today's lecture was how to make this lecture, which is highly theoretical, interesting. So last time, like I introduced a bit of science, I'm going to introduce a bit of maths today. So don't worry. Okay, through technologies such as remote sensing or GPS, to produce relevant trends, relationships, and patterns. So this is the definition you can write in your own words. So it is a science of collecting, storing, manipulating, querying, updating, visualizing, presenting, sharing the data, the geographical data collected through technology such as remote sensing and GPS to study trends, relations, and patterns. For example, what was the pattern of rainfall as compared when we compare two years, for example 2010 and 2020? What is the comparison or trend of the urban climate change or the temperatures? How much vegetation or forest cover has India gained or lost? You might have heard of reports for your UPSC examination, the Forest Survey of India, very important. The habitat, the species, the propensity of floods, how the rivers, the fluvial geomorphology, how it is changing, how the tectonic plates are moving. So all this. Then what is GIS? Here you can see GIS. So GIS stands for Geographical Information Systems. It is nothing but it is a computer-based tool or software to again store, manipulate, collect, query spatially georeferenced and non-spatial data. Okay, so this is the definition. So basically this is the science, and for performing that science we need a tool which is provided to us by Geographical Information Systems. Okay, so we need people, we need hardware, software, we need algorithms, we need APIs, application programming interface. So this all interconnection, this forms the heart of geospatial analysis. And one of the tools or software that is used for geospatial analysis is QGIS, which is an open sourced software, that is, it is free of cost to download, and a lot of plugins, ad hoc plugins can be added. So Quantum GIS. Okay. Other is the paid subscription one, that is ArcGIS, you might have heard of. Okay. Now, before that, brief revisit. We have to discuss some points of theory are important. Types of GIS data. So this we have discussed, if you remember, I had discussed about resolution, pixels, rasters. Okay, so basically, if you remember raster, what was raster? Raster is basically when data is represented in the form of grids or pixels, where each pixel stores a value. Okay, so it is used to represent satellite imagery, elevation models, DEMs, digital elevation models. Then what else? It is used to represent LULC, land use, land cover changes. In fact, if you are using habitual of using computers regularly on a daily basis, so you have heard of this GIF, graphical interchange format, bitmap, TIFF, tagged image file format, PNG, portable network graphics, JPEG, joint photographics, experts group. So all these are also raster based pixel. You might have observed we discussed about resolution, okay, the level of detail. So when a raster, when you open this image, okay, like JPG and PNG, when you keep scrolling upwards, when you click that magnifying button, okay, when you keep scrolling your the button, then a time will come that when it starts to appear like this blurry pixels. So this is raster. This, and the contrary to this, we have the vector data. In vector data, the data is stored in the form of lines, polygons, or points. So the basic difference between raster and vector data is that vector data is scalable. I'll show you an example from this also, from the QGIS. I had done an exercise. So scalable means no matter how much you zoom in or zoom out, its resolution will not be affected. It will remain sharp. So if you have worked on AI, that is not artificial intelligence, Adobe Illustrator. So it is a vector based software. Then SVG, scalable vector graphics. Okay, then as far as QGIS is concerned, you might have heard of .shp extension, shapefile. Okay, so all these store in this format. Another difference, important difference, is that this raster data consumes a large amount of space on the hard disk. It is relatively smaller in size. So these are the basic differences upon between the types of GIS data. Both these raster and this vector data, they belong to a category known as spatial data. Okay, spatial data, because we are talking, whenever we are marking any boundaries, any polygons, any point. For example, I'll just show you this image by enlarging it. So this is a So this is a map that I created through QGIS. Now, this file has been created through vectors. You can see the polygon. This is Haryana, Delhi, Chandigarh. So you can read by the heading. This is the line. This is the polygon data. Okay, it is joined. So it is a vector data. Then you can see the line data, river, Ghaggar, Yamuna, then all these national highways, NH9, NH44, NH152. Okay, these are the line data. Then the point data, like I have just used these pins, these are raster images actually. Okay, so points can also be used, but I have intentionally used this. But this is like Sirsa, Hisar, Bhiwani, Jhajjar, Gurugram, Delhi. So all this point data, they correspond to the vector data. Now, when I was working in QGIS itself, you can see the format. If here in the background we have the Google Maps layer, but if I zoom in or zoom out this layer, this these lines are scalable. They will not get pixelated. But as I have exported this whole combination in the form of PNG, this is a PNG format. Okay, so this is a raster format. If, although it is a very high resolution 300 dpi, but if I stretch it all across the room, a time will come when small pixels or grids will start showing up. Okay, so all in all, this is a raster image. It has been created. When it was being created, it was used the lines, polygons, and points as vector data was being used. But when it was exported, it was all image. It was created using a grid of pixels. So this is the point which I wanted to highlight. So we have discussed the types. First type of data, that is the spatial data, types of GIS data. Okay, the next type is the attribute or non-spatial data. Just remember the definition of GIS which I gave you. It is a tool or computer-based software used for collecting, analyzing, updating, visualizing, and presenting geographically referenced spatial or non-spatial data. Okay, so what non-spatial data? Of course, it is not associated with the space. We have here we have the latitudes, here we have the longitudes. So it defines a particular area or extent. So this is spatial data. But this Ambala, Chandigarh, how do we come to know about this? These are just polygons and lines. I have used the inherent properties which were associated with the spatial data to label them. I've not labeled them on my own. Okay, I've just drawn the lines haphazardly. No, I have taken it from the Survey of India website, these locations and these polygons and these lines and this highway layer, and they have some inherent property. So when you right click on the vector layer, okay, and you can see, sorry, this is, you can see the attribute table or the non-spatial data. So for example, if it has an ID associated with it, this is the layer which contains the highway lines, okay, which is a type of vector data. So NH44 name type highway. So this gives the additional information. For example, if my house is located at a particular destination, okay, I can mark the house on the map, on my house on the map with the help of a point. I can mark the roads leading to the house. I can mark the polygon Delhi. Okay, but the properties of my house, like what is the number, on which floor I stay, okay, on which road I've drawn, but on which street, on which road, in which district, that will be contained in the attribute data file. Okay, and finally, we have another type of data which is known as metadata. Okay, so metadata, essentially what it is data about data in layman terms. It tells whether the data that we have, the spatial or non-spatial data, its extent, its origin, its author, whether it is usable or not. Okay, so that fine fine components associated with spatial and non-spatial data. So these are the three basic types of GIS data. I hope this is clear. Okay. Now, one more important theoretical part. After that, we are going to have fun. So, sources of data. Okay. So, we have discussed the types. Sources, one source we have already discussed at length in the previous lecture, satellites, remote sensing satellites. So, this is an example of primary data. Okay. The data which is not extracted from any other source. We are directly observing or recording the features, the objects, the trees, vegetation, water bodies, buildings, settlements. Directly, we are collecting the images. Or we are going on a field survey. We are observing the soil, we are picking up the rocks and studying the geology. So, all this information it contributes to the primary data. Secondary data consists of cadastral maps, tables, the government data, the data on the data existing on open platforms, and the one of the prime examples is census. So census data is already has already been collected by the government. So for the government or the block level officers or who were the volunteers going from home to home or collecting data through Google Forms or from online facilities, that was primary data for them. But as GIS analysts, when we are working on softwares like QGIS or ArcGIS, for us it will be the secondary data. Okay. So these are the two basic types of data. Then there is a third category of data also, which is known as crowdsourced data. Okay. So like we have observed that this is census, this is official data. It has a certain value to it. It has a level of reliability, authenticity, genuine. It is genuine in nature. Primary data also we are collecting, but it has not been verified. It has to be verified. When it comes to crowdsourced data, you might have heard of OSM, OpenStreetMaps, or most commonly for the drivers or driving enthusiasts, traveling enthusiasts, you might have heard of Waze. Okay, Mapillary. So in these are not government regulated by the government. These are actually the data which is provided on these apps or platforms that is contributed by the common citizens, by the common volunteers. It updates itself in real time. So you can actually get, okay, the accident has taken place here, or this route has been blocked, or this route has been jammed, so you can take another. So this is not regulated. So the now if we compare all the three types of data, you can immediately try to brainstorm and establish the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages of each. Now, for example, primary data, if we do it by ourselves, it is difficult to collect. Okay, it will be dependent upon the weather conditions, accessibility, terrain, logistics, whether we have the necessary software or hardware, whether we have the plotters or GPS devices which can detect or sense the temperature or the rainfall. So that is a limitation. Okay, but it is real time. We are actually going, we are not dependent on some secondary data. Okay, we can verify. This is known as ground truthing. We can verify. Secondary data is reliable, but it can be outdated. For example, till now, because of unforeseen circumstances, we are still relying on 2011 census data. Then when it comes to this, the main issue is reliability. Anyone can provide any type of updates. There is some sort of genuineness or authenticity, but again, it is not verified. So this is the thing. Now, let's come to the foundation, mathematical foundation, scientific foundation of geospatial analysis. Now, two words which two images are given. So one represents geography, other represents geodesy. Okay. So how will you define geography? It is geo earth, graphy means study. But if I extend or advance the definition a bit further in one line, it is the study of the interaction between the human beings and the non-human beings. Okay, the non-living things in simple terms. We the physical and the human part. Physical, like mountains. First, we study, whenever we study geography, we study physical. Okay, this is the geomorphology. Then we study about the climate. Then we come to human geography, how that geomorphology, how the mountains, how the rivers, how the climate affects the settlements, the people, the patterns, the clothing, the food, the agriculture, and how the human geography in turn provides feedback and affects physical geography. Okay. The important, then this geodesy. Geodesy provides the mathematical foundation or framework to provide measurements for the size, location, extent, shape of Earth in space. Okay. Now, we know that the Earth, we look when we see, okay, so we draw an Earth like this, but many of us know till now that the Earth is not a perfect sphere. Okay, so the basic concept, if we start, suppose we remove all the uneven features, mountains, plateaus, etc. So the Earth will appear as a bulge, smooth surface with a bulge at the north and the south because of centrifugal force. Okay, you might have heard of the geometrical shape ellipse. So if this is a circle, if we squeeze the circle from two sides, it will get converted into an ellipse. So the basic property of ellipse is that it has a major axis, it has a minor axis, and it has two foci. Okay, two foci. Earlier, in the beginning, when geography came into being, it was assumed that the Earth and other planets, they revolve around the sun in a circular orbit. Now we all know that if we assume sun to be at this place, then the Earth revolves around it in an elliptical orbit. So you might have heard terms about aphelion and perihelion. Okay, similarly, if we consider moon as the satellite of Earth, if we place Earth in between, the moon revolves in a in an elliptical orbit with, when it is at this point, it is farthest away, the apogee, and when it is nearest to the Earth, it is known as perigee. Okay, now Earth is a 3D surface. So if we remove all this uneven surface and already we compress it because it is flatter at the poles, so it will correspond to a 3D version of ellipse known as ellipsoid. Okay, ellipsoid is a 3D representation of an ellipse. In ellipse or in a circle, we have two dimensions, we can say, or in ellipse we have the major and the minor axis. In ellipsoid 3D, just like in coordinate system, 3D coordinate system, we have x, y, and z. So similarly, in this we have three axes, three directions, A, B, and C. Now, Earth is a type of ellipsoid which is known as oblate spheroid. Okay. How is it different from this normal ellipsoid? Ellipsoid is an umbrella term. Oblate spheroid is a type of ellipsoid which comes close to defining the Earth. So in that, you can see here all the lengths in a general ellipsoid, all the lengths of the axis can be different. But here, the equatorial, if we treat this as the equator or the line which divides the Earth into two equal hemispheres, these two axes, equatorial radii, they are equal in length. And this is the rotational axis which has a different measurement or length, and the Earth is rotating west to east. Okay, so it is rotating about this C axis. So this is the main point. Now, what is the use of this, of expressing Earth as a spheroid? oblate spheroid. Okay. Now, when we talk about, there is another term which you should be knowing, that is, you might be wondering when I will come to that term, geoid. Okay. So when I ask what is a geoid, you might all say, okay, geoid is the approximate shape. It is not a sphere, perfect, it is a geoid. It is not entirely correct, because geoid, if I define it, it is the mean sea level which is attained due to gravitational force and rotation of Earth. If we ignore everything else, if we just keep the gravitation and rotation of the Earth, then the mean sea level, okay, here just observe in this figure, this is the geoid. The red line is representing the geoid. It is undulating. It is representing the mean sea level which is obtained if we take into consideration only the gravitational force and the rotation of the earth. We neglect the tides, we neglect the ocean currents, we neglect the wind. Okay. It is also a smooth surface, but it is undulating. Why? Because the geoid represents the surface, the mean sea level, which is affected by the gravitational force. And how the gravitational force works? It always acts from the center, of the earth. So it takes into consideration the local variations in the density also. For example, heavier rocks, they might pull more due to the greater gravitational force, gmm upon r square, greater the mass, greater the gravitational force. Lighter rocks may have local differences. Now this blue line, we've already discussed the ellipsoid or the spheroid. So this blue line, the smooth surface, which we generally use for mathematical measurements, we have already discussed, this is the spheroid. Now don't get confused in this. We'll discuss what is the significance of both. So I hope you have both, you have understood both the geoid and the ellipsoid. Now, when we talk about GPS navigation systems, so GPS or any mathematical measurements or the projections of 3D surface onto the 2D surface which is done, it is of the ellipsoid or the oblate spheroid, not of the geoid. So when the GPS device is located here, it is actually measuring this height. Okay. It is actually measuring this height. Okay. But what the geographers actually want, they want to know the height from the mean sea level. That mean sea level is defined by the shape of the geoid, which is this line. Okay. So for example, if we have to find the elevation of this point above sea level, the GPS device can only detect the height from the ellipsoid. Okay. But when we have for the actual elevation or above the sea level, we have to calculate this height and then add these two to get the actual elevation above sea level. So if we want to determine the elevation of Mount Everest, we cannot just rely on this mathematical ellipsoid or the GPS to collect that to determine that elevation above sea level. We have to make adjustments and we have to account for the error or difference between the height of ellipsoid and geoid to arrive at the accurate measurements. Okay, no need to go into depth, but you should know these basic things. What is a geoid? What is happening? Because I also, while teaching, I came to know about this stuff. Okay, earlier I was okay, Earth is a geoid. Okay, but all these terms, they have particular meaning, and you should be aware of them. And now, if you have the just basic idea, not if you don't know even the definition, you will realize the importance as we go further in the lecture. Now, before that, we come to projections. Okay, what is a projection now? So, projection is the mathematical transformation of the 3D Earth surface onto a 2D surface like map or sheet. Okay, so this is a simple definition. The most commonly used projection you might have heard is the Mercator projection, which was established by Gerhard Kramer in 1569. Kramer is a Dutch word which translates to Mercator. So it came to be known as a Mercator projection. Now, a little bit about projection. Before that, if I ask you, what is a latitude, what is a longitude, what is a graticule? So, because you will come across these terms in textbooks. So, how will you define a latitude? You will say, okay, parallel lines, imaginary parallel lines to equator. No, that is not the correct definition. It is actually the angular distance of a point on the surface of the earth relative to the equator. So, angular distance means the angle when you write 20 degree, 30 degree, 40 degree, you're not actually just drawing the parallels, you are measuring the angle. So this is 0, this is 20, this is 30, this is 90. Okay, this is important. Similarly, longitude is the angular distance east or west of the prime meridian. Okay, graticule is the network or grid which is formed when the latitudes and longitudes meet. And why we study graticules? Because these graticules or grids, these are the networks which we need to project through mathematical formula or by geometry to obtain an approximate representation of the Earth's continents and oceans. Okay. Now, you might have come across various such diagrams. Just be aware. I'm not going to go into detail that these diagrams are not entirely correct. Now, I have a habit of, scrutinizing each and everything. So that is why I am telling you this. Now, for example, Mercator projection, cylindrical Mercator projection. First of all, why it is most commonly used? Because it represents, it can be how it is produced. We basically, in layman terms, we place a globe, we place the earth, we cover it with a cylinder, and then we unwrap the projection. So this is a way to explain, but it is not such very easy. The property basically, it is a conformal or orthomorphic projection. That is, it preserves the size and it preserves the area and direction. Okay, particularly along the equator. I'll show you a map also. Then you might have heard of this Rhumb lines, constant direction of Rhumb lines. I have an image in the next slide. I'll show you. Then the meridians are equally spaced, and as we go, the poles cannot be represented on this because it is rectangular in shape. There is high distortion as we move away from the equator. Scale is accurate only near the equator. Okay, so these are some of the important properties. Now, how this, similarly, when we come to the conical projections, we place a cone like a birthday cap. Okay, then we unwrap the cone. We'll not discuss in detail, otherwise we'll go off track. Then there is the zenithal or planar projection also. Now, the mistake here, I would just like to point out some things. Now, the mistake here is that here a light source is shown, which is incorrect for Mercator projection. Why? Because Mercator is a non-perspective projection. There are two types of projections, perspective and non-perspective. In perspective projection, it is assumed that there is a light source kept in the vicinity vicinity or away from the Earth, and the shadow, the hypothetical shadow which is being produced by that hypothetical light source, that is being used to create the projection. But here, light source in Mercator projection, light source is not used. It is an entirely based on mathematical formula. So this you should be aware about. Difference here, it is this, just look at this here. The planar, this is orthographic projection. Planar projection, again, if I discuss in brief, if you remember, there are three types: mnemonic, stereographic, and orthographic. Now here it is written orthographic, planar, or zenithal projection, and it is a perspective type of projection because it takes the help of a hypothetical light source. But in orthographic projection, the light is supposed to come from infinity. Here the light source, here it is shown that it is at the center of the Earth. When the light source is at the center of the Earth, that type of zenithal or planar projection is known as mnemonic projection. When it is at the periphery, then it is known as stereographic. So you need to be careful whenever you study this. Also in conical also, okay, not all conical projections are perspective, most of them are non-perspective. Okay, so this is important. Some important terms. Now, you might have heard these two terms, zenith, like I used here, and azimuth. Okay, these two terms are often used interchangeably, but they have different meaning. Okay, zenith, if you see this, zenith, if I am standing over here, then zenith is the point which is located directly overhead, the imaginary point which is directly located overhead in the celestial sphere. The point opposite to this is the ground, is known as nadir. This is important. This term is important in remote sensing. This is azimuth. Okay. Azimuth is the direction which is measured in degrees or the angular distance from a point, particularly the north, which defines the position of a celestial body. Just remember this. So basically, when I talk about this direction, I'm talking about azimuth. So most of the zenithal projections, they have an azimuth nature, that is, they preserve direction. Okay, so this is the basic concept. Now, again, some interesting concepts. Here, can you observe? This is a world map you can see. But here, the important thing to notice is that the dark blue colors, the light blue color is actually what we observe in the actual maps. Okay, Russia is so big, Antarctica, the light blue part. Greenland is so big, almost the size of Africa. But this is actual problem or shortcoming of Mercator projection. Most of the maps that we see or attach on the wall in atlases, they are Mercator projections. But like I said, that near, when we were discussing the properties of Mercator projection, I told you that the distortion is minimal, the scale is accurate only near the equator. So you can see that this dark blue and light blue structures or shapes, they are overlapping only near the equator. As we go north or south of the equator, you can see how the shapes are getting morphed, or they are not actually representing the actual size of the countries or the continents. So Russia is actually this, if we observe on a globe, but Mercator, it extends. And if you just try to imagine, we have a sphere. If we try to imagine what is happening is, so already this part is stretched when we unwrap the cylinder. Then as we go, the sphere, the north or south, the sphere is getting compact, or the points are getting closer. But to maintain same latitude, same longitude position, we have to stretch it apart. Okay, are you understanding? So this is the reason this north, in order to align it with the same longitude as we see on the actual 3D representation of the earth on a globe, these have to be stretched, so that if a city which was on the same longitude as that on the equator, to keep it on the same longitude, we have to stretch it while unwrapping it and projecting it on a rectangular surface. Okay, so this is the, and this gives rise to this Rhumb line. If you are watching the lecture carefully, this Rhumb line I mentioned, and Mercator, what it does is it creates a constant Rhumb line. So now what is a Rhumb line? Rhumb line is actually a navigational path, okay, which makes equal angles with all the longitudes that it passes through. In simple terms, Rhumb line or Loxodrome, it is also known as Loxodrome, it is a path which is useful for ships or navigators to set a constant bearing. For example, what happens is, now if we view the Rhumb line on a Mercator projection, we view it as a straight line. That is the purpose of the Mercator projection. So if we have to go from New York to Madrid, the ship or the aircraft, it can just use the compass, and okay, we have to go towards the east. It can just set the direction and no worries. But you can see that this Rhumb line is actually a greater distance than if we follow this great circle. Okay, this is actually, great circle is representing the shortest distance. But what is the shortcoming if we follow this great circle is that we will constantly have to adjust the compass, which can be a pain in the posterior. Okay, so although the distance, if we follow the Rhumb line, which will be longer, but the navigational problem, the steering wheel, the helm of the ship, that will be the rudder, that will be easier to manage. And if we try to visualize the same on the globe, the great circle will appear as a straight line. Okay, here it is appearing as a curve, but actually it is shorter than this because it is actually traversing on a globe. Okay, it is a little bit challenging but interesting to understand. Here the Rhumb line is actually, here we can actually observe that the Rhumb line is at a greater distance. It is longer than in this. It is the actual figure. Now, if we go by the definition, I hope you are seeing the longitudes here. What I gave the definition of Rhumb line is that is a navigational path or loxodrome which crosses every meridian at a same angle. So if I take this longitude here, so it is, for example, it is theta, then it is also theta, then this is also theta, then this is also theta. That is why same angle, and when this 3D Earth surface is projected onto a Mercator projection, it shows a straight line. Okay. Now, another interesting, now we discussed the projections. Now in GIS, what happens is we have to tell the system or computer that, boss, what are we actually studying or visualizing the Earth? Are we visualizing the Earth in terms of the latitude, longitude, that is the angular coordinates, or the x and y, the Mercator projection? The x and y coordinates, which you have already read in maths, also correspond to the Cartesian coordinates. So now we have to obtain a projection, because if we are carrying a globe, why do we actually need a projection? Because first of all, we cannot carry a globe everywhere. And then if we have to measure a distance like east or north, we cannot say, okay, I am at 77, I am at 24-degree north and 77-degree south. So come meet me here. Okay, until we have a GPS location, or actually we share it through Google Maps, we cannot reach here. If we project it into a Mercator or any other 2D format which has this x and y coordinates, so we can say, okay, boss, I am 500 meter east of you and 400 meters north. So it will be much easier to calibrate and much easier to measure. Same with the area also. If I have to measure, I showed you in one of the previous slides the polygon Delhi. Now, if I am using the angular coordinates, latitudes and longitudes, can you easily calculate the area? If I have drawn Haryana here, here is Chandigarh, here is Delhi. Okay, so I say, okay, this is like 30 degrees and 77-degree north, and this is 29-degree 75. Okay, I have these coordinates. How will I measure the area? The distance in meters cannot be measured from the degrees, so it has to be converted for convenience into 2D. So according to that, we have two types of coordinate systems. One is the GCS, which is the geometric coordinate system, and the other is the PCS, not the public civil services exam, but the projected coordinate system. And GCS, you have understood latitude, longitude. Projected coordinate system is used for the Cartesian coordinates, x and y coordinates. And the most commonly used PCS is the UTM, Universal Transverse Mercator Projection. Mercator we have already discussed. And here x coordinates refers to the easting or represents the longitudes. X, if I create a graticule, so this x coordinate, it represents east and west direction. So normally we don't say longitudes or latitudes here, we say easting, because we are not measuring angular distances. We say, okay, this point or this point is 500 meters easting or east of this point. Okay, we don't need to go into the mathematical formula of how angular distance or angular coordinates are converted into x and y coordinates. That is quite complicated. That is done automatically by the GIS tool or computer based software. That is why it gets convenient for us to use. Okay. Now another important aspect is the address of Earth and then the particular location. So you might have heard of this term, datum. Okay, what is datum? It is actually a framework or mathematical model that defines the position, location, and extent of Earth in space, in 3D space. And what is that shape? It is a type of ellipsoid, or we can say oblate spheroid. Okay. So for mathematical observation, now you can see how the concepts are getting related. For mathematical calculations, for projections, we are not using geoid. We are using the ellipsoid. Earth is an ellipsoid or oblate spheroid. We already talked about it. So there were 3 axes, and we treat it, if you try to just imagine it in a 3D shape. So these two were equal, these two axes, and this is the axis of rotation. Now this shape, this is actually datum. Okay, this is one of the datums which we use, and we have the code names or representative figures for that. The most commonly used datum is WGS 84 or World Geodetic System or World Geodetic Survey 84. There is NAD 83 also, which is used for North America, but this is the most commonly which we used for the projected coordinate system, like I showed you Haryana. Now that Haryana is not actually the original. I have reprojected it into the x and y coordinates. So that is the basic practice while using any GIS tool. Okay. Then we come to the EPSG. What is this EPSG? EPSG actually stands for European Petroleum Survey Group. Okay, you can read a bit in the history. Actually, this was a survey group which were involved in explorations a long time back, but now it refers to a spatial registry of codes and IDs which refer to the which give the spatial references, which define the extent, which define the coordinates of the projections in which that this datum is projected. So examples EPSG like 4326, like EPSG 38, 32436, 324. Sometimes I also get confused. 32463, 324, 32643, 32644, then 3857. Okay. So this 4326, it actually represents the projection in terms of angular coordinates, that is the geometrical coordinate system. This 32643, 32644 are examples of projection in the Cartesian coordinate system or the projected coordinate system. This 3857 is for the commonly used maps like Google Maps, Google Satellite Maps, Esri Maps, the Waze, the Mapillary, all these they are in 3857. Now, when we combine all this, we get the complete address of a particular spatial data, okay, a location. So that is known as CRS, Coordinate Reference System. How do we define it? It is a mathematical framework for defining the address or the size or extent or the location of a particular data, spatial data. So when we combine this EPSG, WGS, so for example, I write this as EPSG 4326. This corresponds to datum. If we study as datum WGS 84. Okay. Then EPSG we already know here, and it is a geometrical coordinate system. Another example which we often come across if we discuss 32643. So here again datum is WGS 84. Okay. The EPSG code is 32643. The UTM zone is 43N. Now this is interesting what this means. Okay, so this is how the important things, because whenever you open a project, or I will show you this example. Whenever you might have seen this if you have worked in QGIS, whenever you export or open a project, there is an option for you to select the projection type, the coordinate system, and the CRS in which you would like to assign the address to that particular shape file, that vector or raster data. So here, like there are various addresses, the 3857 pseudo Mercator, WGS 84, 32643, UTM this. The default CRS is always 4326 because most of the shape files, most of the vector or raster data which we obtain from the Survey of India, from other websites or government sites, they are in the longitudinal, they are in the geometric coordinate system or geometric coordinate reference system. Okay. So now what is UTM? Now again, we have a 3D Earth surface, but we have to project it on a flat surface. And if you observe, this is a part of this topo sheet. This is a topo sheet. You might not be able to see the location. This is actually part of Banaskant district in Gujarat. Okay. So here, whenever you open an atlas, so you see the latitudes and longitudes, the geometric coordinates. Here, if you observe carefully, you might not notice again numbers here. Here we have numbers like 23, 24, 35, 36. Both on the top, and left and right also. Left we have like 9, 34, 24, 31. Okay, so what these represent is these are actually short forms for the eastings and northings. Okay, so normally what happens is that when the projections, when we use the projected coordinate system and we write the x and y Cartesian coordinates, they usually are calculated in 5 or 6 figures, but to shorten, they are shortened in order to make the representation more convenient. Only 2 or 3 digits are mentioned, so you should be aware of this. Here is where the UTM comes into picture. So UTM, we have already talked about, universal transverse Mercator projection. The simple definition or simple explanation is that it consists of 60 zones with, and the width is 6 degrees. Okay, so obviously, because of to avoid distortions or to make the projected coordinate system more easier and convenient to understand, various zones have been created. 60, 60, 6 into 6, 360. Okay, so here you can see different zones. It starts from 0 and goes all the way to 60. Now I have taken a particular segment. I've taken our nation, India, which we usually work on study when it comes to geospatial analysis. Now here you can see the UTM zones clearly: 42, 43, 44, 45, 46 and 47. Okay, so you already know the extent. I hope you remember. So it goes from 8 degree 4 minutes to 37 degrees 6 minutes, then 68 degrees 7 minutes to 97 degree 25 minutes. Okay, so now 42. There is a formula for calculating UTM, just sharing because it is interesting. So if we have to calculate the UTM zone, how will we calculate the UTM zone in any, for any particular area, in which UTM zone that lies? So this is the formula. The zone will be 180 plus longitude value in degrees, okay, divided by 6 plus 1. So this actually corresponds to 72 degrees east, this corresponds to 78. If I put it in the formula, 180 plus 72 divided by 6 plus 1, so 6, 30, 6, 12. So I get 42 plus 1, I get 43, right? So all the places lying in this light green zone, they belong to UTM zone 43. Now remember, I gave an example of EPSG 32643. So for example, if I am working, I was working with Haryana, Delhi, Chandigarh. So it is not possible that I'm aware of the UTM zones all the time. So if I have to tell the software that I am working in this zone, so I should have a fair idea of the zone in which it will approximately lie, or I can search the net. So here you can see that Delhi or Haryana, it most of the part it lies in UTM zone 43. So when I save or reproject that file, when I convert it from the geometric, from latitudes and longitudes reference system to the x and y coordinates, I will tell it, boss, this is the address on which you have to project. Okay, so now then whenever I have to perform any type of operations, buffer, clipping, analysis, calculate area, calculate perimeter, calculate various locations, distance, road network, so this will then become accurate. Similarly, for this area, if I take this area in Uttarakhand, some area like Chamoli, Champavat, etc. So I will use 32644. This is very important, which normally students they don't understand. So here also you can see in a topo sheet, you can see this is Banaskant in Gujarat. So Gujarat, obviously it spans this region. So this region which we are studying, it lies someplace here, and that is why this 43 UTM 43N. Okay, you can see this. If we go towards, it is bordering Rajasthan, the upper, we have Rajasthan, so it belongs to 43N. Fine. So today's lecture was, I know it would have been challenging, but interesting as well. If you know these basics, then QGIS, when you work on geospatial analysis on any software, if you know the basics, then it becomes a lot of fun. So till we meet again next time, Jai Hind.